Let me look at my options here for a sec. It didn't look good on that. Yeah. Well, basically, I've just watched. I've been watching a lot of videos recently, and I'm finding them like there's a common theme with them. And there's a lot of content creators out there, like looking at people like Tide Time, Bricky, a little bit of Puppers, stuff like that, where people are getting a little bit upset with Dead by Daylight and the lack of progression, and people have brought up some interesting points that I want to touch upon a little bit further today. And while I'm prepping, everybody's getting prepped for Stranger Things, I want to talk about those perks and how they're going to fit into the game. And I want to start with the fact that this game is a really good game. It's a really fun game. It's also a really shitty bad game. There's a lot of bugs in it. There's a lot of glitches in it. There is just a toxic player can make you get burned out playing it in a game. Just one toxic person is enough to just burn you out for the rest of the day. And if I get like 2 or 3 in a row, I'm done for the day. I have that sort of... I'm that type of person. You can tell I'm wearing a Jim fucking Sterling Sun shirt. So, the thing you gotta realize is this game has come a long way in terms of balance from when the game originally released and there were only 3 killers. There was only your Trapper, your Wraith, and your Billy. You know, the game's come a long way from the meta of the survivors just fucking bulldozing the killer. That doesn't necessarily mean the game's improving, though. Those are things that should have been fixed. Because let's look at something here, and I think this is pretty important to look at. So, Trapper, Wraith, and Billy come out with the dark times. They have to emergency fix the game repeatedly because it's just so broken. The survivors only run the same 4 perks. They're only running, you know, Sprint Burst, Borrowed Time, Will Make It, and Saboteur. They only run those same 4 perks because Sprint Burst had no cooldown. Saboteur let you disable all the hooks in the game permanently except for the basement ones. Sprint Burst had practically no cooldown on it, and Will Make It affected all healing speeds to anyone after you unhook somebody. So it basically, those were the only 4 perks that you needed. And the killers were underpowered. You could see Wraith coming from... Wraith hasn't changed, really. It's just his perks were even worse. I mean, Trapper was your best bet because of fucking agitation, so that you could get people to the basement with, like, Iron Grasp. And while Billy had the map control, his perks really weren't that great until as the game evolved more. You know, you had double pallets everywhere. You know, you had all these infinite loops, which, by the way, some of the double pallets still exist. Some of the infinite loops still exist. So we still haven't technically gotten out of the dark time. Nurse comes out, Nurse breaks the game. Because Nurse adds a power that they haven't been able to balance. She's still the strongest killer in the game. She does have, you know, some drawbacks to her. She's still the strongest killer in the game by far, though. Even on console, she is the strongest killer in the game as long as you can actually play her. If you can't play the Nurse, if you know how to juke a Nurse, you're fucked. If you know how to play Nurse, you're gonna get a 4-0 every single game. You know, the Hag comes out, and I've heard, you know, oh, well, they introduced Hex Totems, and they added some more gameplay loop, and a little bit more mobility, and the Doctor was released, and the Doctor sort of added this new gameplay mechanic to try and disrupt survivors a bit more, but none of those were game-changing. Neither the Hex Totems. I mean, Hex Totems basically just gave survivors a slightly newer challenge, because you have to look, only 3 Hex Totems came out with the Hag. Third Seal, which most people can play around. Devour, which is situational. There's certain situations where it doesn't come into play. And Ruin, which, again, good survivors can counter that without having to deal with the Ruin. I mean, Noed was the big thing, but then again, Noed didn't get buffed until later on. So, you have Mike, who introduces the Obsession. You know, hey, that's a nice gameplay loop. But Mike and Huntress both had the same problem, which was kind of interesting, which was then when those perks came out that introduced the machine gun build for Mike, and then the machine gun build for Huntress, and it made them brutally strong. And so we'll stop right here for a minute. So just with those 8 killers, the problem with the game became, yes, they fixed those issues. Yes, they fixed some issues in a timely manner. Some issues took a while. But their strategy to fixing them was to nerf it into oblivion and make it unplayable. They just fucking took a sledgehammer and said, no, no, no. Thou shalt not machine gunify. They just destroyed those perks. Like, no, I'm not saying that the perks are still bad. They ended up buffing them up a little bit later over time and doing some reworks. But again, in the moment, to fix the issue, they just took a sledgehammer to it. So then we go to the next round of DLC, which will be these 3 licensed killers, Piggy, Freddy, Bubba. Bubba didn't even have an original power. He had a sideways version of Billy, because they didn't think they were going to get Leatherface, so Billy was the knockoff version of Leatherface. So then when they had to introduce Bubba, they had to, okay, well, you know, we have to kind of like rework this. But his perks were overpowered, and they still a little bit are, but you know, the survivors keep coming out with new perks and stuff, but survivors have been running close to the same perks now for about 2 years. Pretty much since Myers came out, survivors have been running most of the same perks. A couple of variations in it. Freddy came out. Freddy's been unplayable since release until this year when they fixed it. It took them a year, year and a half just to fix Freddy and make him playable. Which, by the way, is Freddy playable now? Yes, but all he is a hag with... He's either a hag that can teleport to gens and slow survivors, or he's a spirit that can teleport to gens because of the pallet mind game. He has a pallet mind game with him, but once you know he has fake pallets, the mind game's gone. And then when you know he has snares, basically it's kind of like playing around a trapper or a hag, but he can teleport to gens. He's not great, but he's playable now, which is more than I could say for him before. You have the pig, who the pig has 2 powers. She's the first killer in the game to get 2 powers. No, I'm not including what the doctor was. The doctor does not get 2 powers. Pig was the first killer in the game to have 2 separate powers. But one power counteracted the other power. One power was kind of useless. The other power was kind of useless, depending on what your style of play was. If you focused on the ambush, you had no way to slow the game down. You had to focus on mainly just trying to get that little hide your terror radius, then dash attack. And if you focused around the bear traps, you had no real way to get rid of survivors, because once they got rid of the bear traps, you were fucked. You didn't have a game at that point. The clown came out, and he was basically another rehash of the doctor. They couldn't get Pennywise, so they wanted to have the killer clown type character, which the clown's power is basically just a doctor power, believe it or not. It's just less annoying to deal with. It requires more skill to use than the doctor, in my opinion, but it's easier. There's more perks to counteract the clown than there are the doctor. And I think the problem with the clown is he's just not in a fun place to play, because if you miss the bottles, he's an M1 killer. And that's the problem with most of these killers that you have to realize is when they miss their power, unless they have a movement ability like Nurse or Billy, which is why Nurse and Billy are so high up, they're M1 killers. Wraith is an M1 killer. If you don't step in the traps, Trapper's an M1 killer. You know, if you don't trigger the hag trap, she's an M1 killer. The doctor is an M1 killer. He just has an extra effect to him. Mike is an M1 killer. His power just lets him do it one less hit. Huntress, if she misses all of her hatchets or she runs out, is an M1 killer. The pig is an M1 killer. Freddy is an M1 killer. He has a little bit of mobility now, and he can slow you down a bit, but he's still an M1 killer. And the cannibal, yes, he does have the insta-down, but again, if you can force him to not use the chainsaw, if you can juke him to where, okay, he has to hit you, guess what? He's an M1 killer. That's the same thing with the clown. His power, if you can force him away from his power, is an M1 killer. Then you have the DLC that's come out while I've been in the game, which is about a year. It'll actually, what's today? Next month will be a year, so 11 months. Yeah, the Spirit came out. She was broken. She was unplayable. But they fixed her really quickly. They were slowly buffing her up. And in my opinion, I think if you're asking me on console who the number 1 killer is, I will tell you the Spirit. Because spirits are more common than nurses. Nurses are not as good. I think the Spirit is the number 1 killer in the game. She's hard to play, she's hard to master, but once you know how to play her, she's fantastic and she's solid. The thing with the Spirit is she has so many different advantages. She has mobility, she has mind game potential. You know, she can win chases, she can cut you off, she can force you into situations you don't want. She's the all-around package right now. She just requires a lot more to play. And then you have Legion. Legion came out and broke the game because he is just so not fun, unfun to go up against for the survivors at the time. He was just bad. It's like killers didn't like playing as him because he only had one real effective way of play, maybe two if you could coax out the other one, but that required shitty ass survivors. And you had survivors that hated going up against him because there was no counterplay to his most effective way to play. He was basically a shitty, spam-happy version of the nurse, but without the nurse's counterplay. He was just evil. And then they fixed that. It took them about a little bit less than 6 months to fix Legion, but they did fix the Legion. And now he's in the same boat. He's shitty. They buffed his base kit and they weakened his power, so there's no real reason to use his power. You know what the problem with both of these killers is? They're an M1 killer, although Spirit has the better power. The Plague came out and the Plague was fucking broken when she came out, at least for console. No one knew how to deal with her for the first week, week and a half, maybe 2 weeks. Here's the thing. Once people realized that you didn't have to cleanse against her and you robbed her of half of her power, you were fucked. She was fucked. No one plays Plague now. Plague is like Clown. We don't see them on console. Is she a strong killer? Yes, in the right hands, but then again, so is every killer. So is a Trapper. So is a Wraith. So is a Hag. Killers that you would normally say as low-tier killers can be strong if you know how to play them. That doesn't mean they are strong. And then Ghostface released it. Ghostface was broken and unplayable when he came out, and they had to just quickly buff him up. Now, why do I mention all this? Well, let's come to Survivor for a minute. So, when you look at the survivors that have released while I've been in the game, Adam, his perks are fun to play around, but there's nothing game-breaking. Jeff, his perks can be helpful and they're fun to play around, but they're nothing game-changing. Jane, she only has 1 or 2 good perks, they're hard to use, and they're not fun to play around. I'm gonna save Ash for a minute. Even before that, Kate, her perks are not that useful. Tap, his perks are not that useful. Quentin, his perks are not that useful. The last survivor that released that had good quote-unquote meta perks was David King, which is Huntress. Because anytime you've had good perks on a character, they get nerfed into oblivion because survivors abuse them. Because unlike Killer, survivors are just reskins. They're just different versions of each other. And as they rework certain perks, like they tried to rework Decisive to make it not so strong. They tried to rework Borrowed Time and make it not so strong. They tried to rework Saboteur and they just hammered Saboteur to the ground. They tried to rework Leader to being less powerful and Prove Thyself to being more powerful, and they made Leader useless and Prove Thyself overwhelmingly strong. They tried to rework exhaustion perks like Sprint Burst and to make it less useful. They're still strong, and Adrenaline is still overpowering. You know, they tried to rework freaking We're Gonna Live Forever to make it less played, and it still doesn't work. They try and rework perks and it either doesn't work or it is ineffective. It either doesn't work and it's ineffective, or they just hammer it into oblivion and make it bad. And this is where Ash comes out. Ash was the first survivor since David King that came out with a honest-to-goodness meta overpowered perk in Medal of Man. And they nerfed it into the ground. And now you look at Ash and you say, well, what characters have the worst 3 teachable perks? Kate, Ash, and Ace. Because Ace doesn't have anything to get gens done. Ace doesn't have anything to evade. Ace doesn't have anything to heal. Ace is all about luck, getting better shit. Kate, she has a little bit of evasion to her kit. She doesn't have help with altruism. She doesn't help with objective. She just has a little bit to avoiding the killer. She has a little bit to break chases and end chases, or to extend and keep chases going, and she maybe can wiggle off easier. And now what does Ash have? Ash has a perk that somewhat helps with altruism, but there's no point in using it. He has a perk that's somewhat good for wiggling off, but it's difficult to get it used. And he has a perk that somewhat lets you be a little bit tanky, but it's difficult to get it used. All of Ash's perks now are difficult to use. There's no real point to them. Flip-Flop is the strongest of the perks because you will get a killer that will slug more often. Buckle Up's not good because there's no point except for the aura reveal, which is, there are better aura reveals out there. There's no point to Metal Man anymore because it's outmatched by We're Gonna Live Forever. If I'm gonna take a protection hit for a survivor, I would rather get the blood points out of that game than I would a free hit that lets me survive maybe a little bit longer. Plus, I already have to be injured. Plus, it only works against M1 attacks. So it makes it difficult to use it effectively. And I mention this because, and this is where I have my little notebook, so if you see me like leaning down, I'm reading perks and stuff, I'm not like trying to ignore you people. I want to talk about now why it is not effective because of the new perks. So the PTB has not released yet. We have the Gorder, who's going to get this little lunge attack, kind of like Freddy. Her lunge attack is basically going to be Freddy's basic melee range, which is kind of sad. Freddy has such a bad, broken melee range right now. So, here's the problem that I see. So let's look at the Demogorgon perk. So the first one we have is Surge, downing a survivor with a basic attack. So let's start, what does this power counteract? This power is going to counteract the Plague if you run Red Puke. It's going to counter out Leatherface with the chainsaw, Huntress with the hatchets, Trapper with the traps, and Billy with the chainsaw. So those killers already can't use this perk to be effective. It's kind of like why you shouldn't be running Noed on the Legion, because he doesn't get the benefit if you're trying to use the power. So downing a survivor with a basic attack causes all generators within 32 meters to regress by 12% and act as if they had been kicked by the killer, even if there are survivors on them, and this has a small cooldown on it. There's some pretty good combo potential. You could pair it up with Ghostface with Thrilling Tremors. Get some value out of that. You could apply this with a couple of other perks. But I want to mention something. This perk is going to hurt two killers. This perk now hurts the Clown and the Doctor. Because remember, the gen is going to begin regressing and acting as if it's already kicked. Which means you don't get to apply Overcharge and you don't get to apply Pop Goes the Weasel. You have to wait for a survivor to touch the gen before you can use those two perks. Now, basically what this means is you have to run this perk with Thrilling Tremors so that you know what generators you have regressed and what generators are being worked on. Because the survivor will probably instantly just get on the gen before you pick the other survivor up, unless you're running up, like, Fire Up. And if you're running Fire Up, then you're countering your own build, technically. Because you want to know what gens are being worked on, so you can go chase the survivor off, so you can kick the gen, and then apply Overcharge, or Pop Goes the Weasel. So that perk is going to simultaneously hurt two killers, one of whom does not have a lot of playtime as we speak in the Clown. Like, I had 3 games against the Clown this week. I was jumping for joy. I'm like, oh my god, we're getting so many Clowns, it's wonderful! Because the Clown is just not played, especially on console. Okay? That's going to be a strong perk, but is it going to be meta? Is it going to be Barbecue, Noed, Nurses, Ruin, Devour, Huntress? I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, the Demogorgon's going to be fun to play, because she's going to have the teleports and the lunge. She's going to have a little bit of a Hag Nurse teleport, or a Hag Freddy teleport. She's going to have a little bit of the Freddy lunge attack, or a Piggy lunge attack. But you know what the problem is? The killers are getting recycled. Look at the last few killers. Let's look at the last 4 killers we have. What do you have? You have Ghostface. Ghostface is a hybrid of the Pig and Myers. The Plague, if you think about how the Plague truly works, she's basically the Doctor. Think about it. So if every time the Doctor forces a survivor to perform the snap out of it action, if he got an insta-down on his next hit, he would be the Plague. They have the same power, basically. The Legion. He gets to run really fast. He has a unique power, but it's a bad power. He's the only unique power we've had in a while. You know, and then if you look at the Spirit, the funny part is, basically, the Spirit is an invisible version of the Legion. So, basically, the Legion is a knockoff of Spirit's power. Only, it's visible where she's invisible. So, the last 3 killers we've had are just variations of other killers. And you see that with the Demogorgon. She's going to have a pig lunge attack, although it doesn't hide your terror radius. And she's going to have a teleport ability, which will be a combination of Hag and Freddy. That doesn't mean she's going to be playable. You have Cruel Confinement, which Cruel Confinement is maybe going to be effective. It's effective if when you complete a gen, when survivors complete a gen, you run over to the generator that completes to try and, like, trap them in that area, but that's about it. I don't see that perk being that strong. And you have Mindbreaker, which is going to be broken. I think Mindbreaker is going to get nerfed in half. I think Mindbreaker is going to be absolutely destroyed when you see what it does. So basically it is, by the way, Cruel Confinement is every time a generator is completed, all vault locations within 32 meters of that generator are blocked for all survivors for the next 25, 30, 35 seconds, and you get an aura reveal on those blocked vault locations as the killer. I think the duration of that is going to get nerfed. I don't see it staying that way. I see all of these perks getting a nerf. I see Surge regresses gens by 12%. I see that going down. I see the cooldown, or the duration of Cruel Confinement going down, maybe 10, 15, 20 seconds. Same thing, Mindbreaker. So while repairing a generator that is less than 50% done, all survivors suffer from the exhausted status effect. Okay? Which means that's evil in and of itself, because, okay, if I'm playing somebody like Freddy and I teleport over to a gen and you think you can sprint burst away, you're not going to be able to. You have to slowly walk away, wait for that exhaustion to go away, because it persists for 1, 2, or 3 seconds, and then you can sprint burst. And with Freddy's lunge range, that 1, 2, 3 seconds, that duration is all I need to lunge at you and hit you. So now not only are you wasting your sprint burst, but you're also wasting your adrenaline hit. Any existing exhaustion perks then become paused while you're on a gen, even if it's above 50%. That's incredibly good for countering. Like, because a lot of killers have exhaustion add-ons. If you look, the Huntress has exhaustion add-ons, the Clown has exhaustion add-ons. I think the Legion has an exhaustion add-on, but all of those perks that you want to use, like most of the time, let's say you do break a chase with Sprint Burst or Balance Landing or Dead Hard, and you're like, okay, I'll get on the gen until the next time it's for me to get chased. You're not gonna have that perk up if you want to work on the gen. That perk is broken, and of course there's the effect where the effect persists for 1, 2, or 3 seconds after. All of these killer perks are strong, and they're going to help dissolve the current meta we have. Because if you notice, again, look at the perks that the last few killers came out. Again, the reused killers, as I'm going to call them, the Legion, the Plague, and the Ghostface, do not have solid perks. I'm all ears and Furtive Chaser shit. You're not going to see those at high level. Thrilling Tremors has some play around it, but you're not going to see it all that often. Infectious Fright and Davark Diversion. They're shit. Corrupt Intervention, you're gonna see it played, you're not gonna see it played all the time. The Legion, Mad Grit, and Iron Maiden are shit. Discordiance, you're not gonna see it played all the time. And again, all 3 of those perks are perks that are designed to counter the Survivor meta right now, which is Gen Rush. Thrilling Tremors blocks off gens when you pick somebody up. Corrupt Intervention blocks off gens at the start of the game. Discordiance keeps 2 survivors from working on a gen together. The other perks don't help slow the game down for the killer. They're situational. And when you look at the Spirit has great perks because Spirit Fury is a buff to Enduring. It gives you ways to counter chases. Haunted Ground lets you protect your Hex Totems that are constantly getting destroyed, and Rancor gives you a safety net at the end of the game if you couldn't kill your Obsession. So all 3 of those perks are viable, because again, the Spirit was the last good killer we had. She was the last killer that wasn't a reused power. She doesn't have reused perks. She was also the last killer that didn't have her perks nerfed. Because Iron Maiden and Mad Grit got a little bit of a nerf in the PTB. Because Iron Maiden had a longer duration on it, as did Mad Grit. And the Plague got a little bit of a nerf because Infectious Fright had a little bit of a rework. It used to be an aura reveal. Now it's just a notification. And Dark Devotion is just Dark Devotion. And Ghostface had a little bit of a rework to I'm All Ears because it used to apply to rushed actions outside of the terror radius, and then they changed it to rushed actions inside the terror radius, or inside a certain radius. So it made I'm All Ears weaker. It made Infectious Fright weaker. It made Iron Maiden weaker. Perks that had some power got nerfed. They had a little bit of staying power. They could have been good in a meme build. Got nerfed. And now that's where they belong. The meme build. So then you go to Survivor. And what do I see from the Survivor perks? So you have Nancy Wheeler, who all of you Meg mains out there are pretty much going to be leaving Nancy, or leaving Meg to go for Nancy. The problem with Nancy's perks is that they're only good in a couple of situations. So, Fixated is problematic. What the hell are you yammering on about, woman? Okay, well, too bad. I'm working. Fixated is a solid perk, but it's a meme perk. It's probably going to be one of her better perks, but here's the problem. So, again, let's look at Survivor. So, by the way, Jeff has good perks, but nobody plays Jeff. Let's start with that. Jeff has good perks. Jeff's perks are good. The last two Survivors we have shit perks. Jane only has Poised as being solid, but a lot of people don't like running Poised because they're like, oh, that's not helpful. Poised is basically a better version of Dance With Me. You know, you have Solidarity, which is useless. I mean, it's not going to work. And you have Head On, which it's another exhaustion perk that's kind of nice, but the downside is it's very situational. It requires a locker, although it might get buffed with one of Nancy's perks here. And then Ash got the fucking Sledgehammer taken to Metal Man, which makes it pretty useless. And then the rest of his perks weren't that strong to begin with. Here's the problem I have with Nancy, because I see her perks being very similar to Jeff, where the perks are solid filler perks. Because when you look at a build, like let's look at Bill. I run one character specific perk for every character. So for Bill, Borrowed Time. It's the strongest perk of his 3 choice perks. I run another two perks that I need that are often considered meta. So I need something for evasion, so I have Dead Hard, and I need something for sustain, so I have self-care. And then I have another perk that's my choice that I flip around, which will be Stakeout. I can take this out for Ace in the Hole, if somebody is planning to run an extra chest. I can run Spine Chill if I think we're going up against a killer that's not going to have a terror radius. I can run Adrenaline if I think I'm going to have to be ballsy at the end. I can run Aftercare if I'm running with a two-man, and I'm trying to do something like that. I can run Unbreakable if I'm trying to get out. If I don't think I'm going to make it out with Dead Hard, I'll run Unbreakable. I've got Deliverance as another backup for that. I've got Flip-Flop if I take off the Borrowed Time for Unbreakable. I've got Flip-Flop, Boil Over that I could, and then Tenacity that I could potentially pair up. I've got Will Make It I could pair up with that. But again, all of those are going to be filler perks based around my main perk. So my main perk for Bill is either Borrowed Time or Unbreakable. And if I have run Unbreakable, then I'm going to take out Stakeout for something that buffs that perk. And if I'm running Borrowed Time, well, I don't really need to buff that unless I'm running Will Make It, so it's my choice. That's how most Survivor builds kind of work. And when I look at Nancy's perks, what I'm seeing is kind of a similar situation. Better Together, which is just going to help buff gen rushing even further. Hey, I'm on this gen, come get on it with me. Although it's going to kind of get countered out by Discordians. You got Fixated. Hey, I walk faster. But the mind games you can play with the scratch marks is kind of nice. So that'll be solid, but is that perk strong enough? Is Fixated a strong enough perk? Is Better Together a strong enough perk? You have Inner Strength, which is gonna fucking destroy killers. It's gonna destroy killers with hex perks. Or no, Ed, because you're gonna be like, oh, I just cleanse this totem so I can heal myself in the locker. Come here, puppet boy, let me get that totem. Yeah, boy, cleanse this little totem, yeah. Let me go hide in the locker so I can heal up now. I think the activation cost is gonna be a little bit too much, but here's my thing. So I can realistically see all 3 of those killer perks getting nerfed. Are any of Nancy's perks gonna get nerfed? Hell no. Are they gonna get buffed? Probably. Because they're not strong enough. They're memes. They're like... There's no viable playstyle. Like, you could run probably Urban Evasion, Sprint Burst, and Fixated, and basically have a I'm never going to get caught evasion build. You could probably run Better Together with Prove Thyself, so that's just gonna straight up nerf Dwight, because Bond is gonna be useless for gens now. Because what do you use Bond for? You use it mostly as a defensive ability, believe it or not. Hey, this guy's running after me and he's injured. I bet he's got the killer on his ass. I'm gonna go the other way. You don't use it to find other survivors to get a gen, especially when Better Together is gonna come out. You have Inner Strength, which is gonna be a nice way to heal up so people aren't gonna be so reliant on adrenaline. Tell like, okay, let's get this last gen done so I can get my adrenaline. Whee! I'm fast as fuck, boy! And they're not gonna be so reliant on self-care. Although, to be fair, you don't see self-care as much at the higher up you go on the tier, on the play level. But they're not... Those are situations where it's basically saying, okay, you can go with this, or you can go with that. You can go with this, or you can go with that. You can go with this, or you can go with that, because this is where it's at. Fair use, don't copyright me. They're not that effective. And then, so looking at Steed, so you got Babysitter. After unhooking a survivor, the unhooked survivor leaves no scratch marks or blood trails for the next 4, 6, 8 seconds, and you and the killer exchange aura reveals. So basically, you're trading off 4 seconds of Object of Obsession for a buff to Borrowed Time. That perk will work great with Borrowed Time, or Will Make It. Actually, it won't work at all with Will Make It. I take that back. I thought that through for a minute. But it's like, hey, you know, it's a good anti-tunneling perk, that's for sure. Because it means, hey, the person you get off a hook, you know. I think it's going to go nice with Deliverance. But I think the problem that I have with that perk is, again, if I'm not running it with Borrowed Time, why am I running it? There's no point to it. Camaraderie is insane. So, while on hook and in the struggle phase, anytime another survivor comes within 16 meters of your hook, the struggle timer will be paused for 10, 12, 14 seconds. That's gonna get nerfed. That's gonna get nerfed. There's gonna be a fucking cooldown put on that. I imagine like maybe a 15-second cooldown gets put on that. I think that would be fair. Because you can only use it once per game. If you DC, you don't get to use it. If you get moored, you don't get to use it. If you die on hook, you don't get to use it. If your team stays on the opposite side of the map and doesn't come near you, you don't get to use it. I see a lot of drawbacks to it. I see it being really strong. I see it pissing off a lot of killers. It's a unique perk. It's one of the only perks here. I think it's actually probably the only perk here that does not have a comparable thing. The closest thing would be maybe Breakdown off of Jeff. Maybe it's a knockoff of Breakdown. I don't see that. You have Second Wind. This one's convoluted, so here we go. Healing one full health state active on another survivor will activate this perk. So A, this could pair well with Autodidact or Will Make It. The next time you are unhooked, whether you unhook yourself or are unhooked, you suffer from the Broken effect. Sound much like any perk that a certain Adam Francis has? This perk will passively heal you up to 100% health over the duration of 24, 22, 20 seconds, as long as you are outside the killer's terror radius. This perk then deactivates if you get fully healed by the perk, or if you get downed before it completes. This perk has a number of problems to it. 1, the passive heal only applies when you're outside the killer's terror radius, which means you can't pair this with something. 2, another thing that's important to note is if you are already broken from a plague or deliverance, this perk will not activate until the previous perk is countered, or the previous broken effect is countered. So if you unhook yourself with Adam, you have to wait out the 60 to 120 seconds, then the perk will begin to work for another 24 to 20 seconds if you're outside the terror radius. Or if you're playing as the Plague, you just, or going up against the Plague, you just cleanse yourself. But the problem is when you cleanse yourself, ordinarily you're going to be fully healed. So those two things counteract. Not to mention the fact that 20 seconds is about the time it would take to self-care yourself or heal yourself without a medkit. If you were being healed by another survivor, that's about 14 to 15 seconds roughly, I think. If you're healing yourself with a medkit, depends on how good your medkit is. I mean, it's basically the same amount of time as a self-care. I think it's a little bit faster than a self-care. But the other thing too is, why would I run an ability that gives me the broken status effect and leaves me one shot? It's like, it won't work with no mither. I mean, imagine if it worked with no mither. Imagine if this worked where, I think Second Wind would work better as this type of perk, where, so, after you are unhooked for the next 15 to 20, 15, 20, or 25 seconds, you are damage immune, while you suffer from the broken status effect. You can take as many hits for that amount of time. So it would be a nice buff to No Mither, which could use a decent buff. It would be a nice buff to Deliverance to make that a stronger anti-tunneling perk. But they're not going to do something like that. And I don't blame them, because it'd be too close to borrowed time. But the problem is, again, I can see Babysitter, Camaraderie, and Second Wind for Survivor getting nerfed, because all those perks are relatively decent compared to Nancy's. They all have some potential to them, but they're not going to work in every situation. I think that's the problem with the balance of the game right now, because survivors run the same few perks. You'll see Prove Thyself sometimes. You see Sprint Burst. You see Adrenaline. You see Self-Care. You know, you'll see Iron Will, you see Borrowed Time, you see Balance Landing, Urban Evasion, you'll see List, you see Decisive, you see Dead Hard. Those are the perks you see the most as a survivor. You don't see a lot of generic perks, and to be fair, from the killer side, you don't see a lot of killer generic perks except from Noed. Most of your other survivors, you're not seeing Quentin perks, you're not seeing Tap perks, you're not seeing Jane perks, you're not seeing Jeff perks, you're not seeing Adam perks, you're not seeing Kate perks, you're not seeing Ash perks. And when you look at killer, you have to look at what killers are played the most. Well, obviously, you're going to have shittier killers like Trapper and Wraith being played, and the Doctor, because they're free. So you don't have to, you're going to have people that don't buy DLC. And then you're going to have two of the stronger killers, and Billy and Nurse, well, they're free. So you're going to see good survivors using that. That leaves the Hag, who's kind of in no man's land, the Huntress, who kind of in no man's land. And then when you look at DLCs, you see, well, Bubba's cheap is the cheapest of the DLC, so you're going to see more Bubba. Mike can be purchased with iridescent shards, so a free player could potentially get Mike. But what about the ones that I have to pay money for? You're not seeing a lot of Ghostface. Recently you see a lot of Ghostface, but that's mostly Ghostface players. They're not necessarily good. You don't see clowns, you don't see pigs, you don't see Freddy's. I was aiming against Freddy today. I was like, wow, that's new. You'll see Freddy more now that he got buffed. You don't see the pig, unless they're like a diehard pig player or they're new and they just want to try her out. Same with clown. Spirit's hard to use, so you're not going to see people use her, even though she's the most effective killer right now. And you got Legion and Plague that, why would I play the Legion or the Plague? They're in the same boat as the Clown. So, before we jump for joy when we see the Stranger Things DLC and the Stranger Things PTB, let's take into consideration that the killer side is probably going to get nerfed, and if it doesn't, it's going to be overpowered. And from the survivor side, most of the perks are either not going to be as game-breaking as people say they are, or they're just going to get nerfed like the killer perks are. Because if there's one thing I know from Dead by Daylight, it's the fact that it takes them way too long to balance their game. Peace.